Hi, welcome to the show today. So glad to have you here. The topic is real angel stories, and it's part 3. So all new ones I haven't talked about before on the podcast. And I just want to start by saying people from all over the world have reported encounters with mysterious beings, and they appear to bring important messages or lend much needed assistance, and then they can vanish without a trace. Some of the most fascinating and uplifting stories of this type are when people are perceiving it as miraculous in nature. Almost anyone would hearing the story. Sometimes these take the form of answered prayers or they're interpreted as the actions of angels. These remarkable events and encounters lend comfort, strengthen faith, and even save lives. They almost always seem to happen when they are needed the most. So, however you view them, these real life experiences are worth our attention. And so I'm glad you're here today. The first one is a child's guardian angel. A little girl named Jackie believes that her guardian angel came to her aid on 2 occasions to help her avoid serious injury. According to her, she physically felt and heard these angels, and both encounters happened when she was 5 years old. So the first experience took place at a popular sledding hill where Jackie was enjoying the day with her family. The young girl decided to try sledding down the steepest part of the hill. She closed her eyes and started down the hill. She said, I apparently hit someone going down and I was spinning out of control. I was heading for the metal guardrail. I didn't know what to do. And suddenly I felt something push my chest down. Oh, you know what? I think I got to start over. Hi, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here with me today. The topic is real angel stories. This is part 3. So these are angel stories I have not yet shared with you on my podcast. First, I want to say hello to my listeners in General Santos, which is the province of South Cotabato in Philippines. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your support of my podcast. People from all over the world have reported encounters with mysterious beings. They can appear to bring important messages or lend much needed assistance, and then sometimes they vanish without a trace. Some of the most fascinating and uplifting stories like this are those that people perceive as being miraculous in nature. Sometimes they take the form of answered prayers or they're interpreted as angelic intervention. These remarkable events and encounters can lend comfort, strengthen faith, and even save lives. They almost always seem to happen when they are most needed. However you view them, these real life experiences are worth our attention. I want to start first with a story I call A Child's Guardian Angel. Jackie believes that her guardian angel came to her aid on 2 occasions to help her avoid serious injury. According to her, she physically felt and heard this protective force. Both encounters happened when she was age 5. The first experience took place at a popular sledding hill where Jackie was enjoying the day with her family. The young girl decided to try sledding down the steepest part of the hill. She closed her eyes and started down the hill. She said, I apparently hit someone going down and I was spinning out of control. I was heading for the metal guardrail. I didn't know what to do. I suddenly felt something push my chest down. I came within less than a half inch of the rail, but didn't hit it. I could have lost my nose. Jackie's second experience occurred during her birthday celebration at school. It's again at age 5. She had run across the playground to put her birthday crown on a bench, and while running back to her friends, some boys tripped her. The playground had a lot of metal objects and wood chips. Jackie went flying and something hit her just below her eye. She said, but I felt something pull me back when I fell. The teacher said that they saw me sort of fly forward and then fly back right afterwards. And as they hurried me to the nurse's office, I heard an unfamiliar voice repeatedly telling me, don't worry, I'm here. God doesn't want anything to happen to his baby. Next story is the hospital angel. It's remarkable how many stories of angels come out of hospital experiences. And it may not be so hard to understand when we remind ourselves that they are places of intense emotions, prayers, and hope. A woman entered a hospital in 1994 with acute pain from a fibroid tumor. The surgery was successful, but more complicated than expected, and her troubles weren't over. She recalls that she was in horrible pain. She had an allergic reaction to the morphine she was given, and the doctors tried to counteract it with other medications. Now, this only made a bad experience even worse. She had just had a major surgery, and now she was dealing with the pain of an acute drug reaction on top of that. After receiving more pain medication, she was able to sleep for a few hours, and she said, I awoke in the middle of the night. According to the clock on the wall, it was 2:45. I heard someone speaking and realized someone was at my bedside. It was a young woman with short brown hair and wearing a white hospital staff uniform. She was sitting and reading aloud from the Bible, and I said to her, Am I all right? Why are you here with me? The woman visiting her stopped reading but did not look up. She simply said, I was sent here to make sure you'd be all right. You are going to be fine. Now you should get some rest and go back to sleep. The woman began to read again, and this little girl at the time, a woman at the time rather, drifted off to sleep. The next morning, she explained this experience to her doctor, who checked and said that no staff had visited her overnight. She asked all the nurses, and no one knew of this visitor. To this day, she says, I believe I was visited by my guardian angel that night. She was sent to comfort me and assure me that I would be okay. And coincidentally, the time on the clock that night, 2:45 a.m., is the exact time recorded on my birth certificate when I was born. The next story I call Rescued from Loss of Hope. Perhaps more painful than any injury or illness is the feeling of utter hopelessness, the despair of the soul that leads one to thoughts of suicide. Dean experienced this pain as he was going through a divorce at a young age. The thought of being apart from his two young daughters was almost more than he could bear. But on one night of stormy darkness, Dean was given renewed hope. At the time, he was working on an oil rig, and that night he was having serious thoughts of taking his life as he looked down from the 128-foot-tall derrick. He said, my family and I have strong religious beliefs, but it was hard not to think about ending it. In the worst thunderstorm I'd ever seen, I climbed the derrick to take my position to pull pipe out of the hole we were drilling. His co-workers urged him not to climb the derrick, saying they'd rather have downtime than risk someone's life, but Dean ignored this and began to climb. He said, lightning flashed all around me. Thunder boomed. I cried to God to take me. If I couldn't have my family, I didn't want to live, but I couldn't take my own life that way. God spared me. I don't know how I survived that night, but I did. A couple of weeks later, he says he bought a small Bible and traveled to a place that was very peaceful for him, where his families lived for a long time. He sat down on top of one of the green hills and began to read. And he had such a warm feeling enter him as the sun parted through the clouds and shone down on him. He said it was raining all around him, but he was dry and warm in his little spot on top of that hill. Dean says that these moments changed his life for the better. He met his new wife and fell in love. They started a family together that includes his two daughters. And he says, thank you, God, and the angels you sent that day to touch my soul. I call this next story Angelic Visit Before Being Born. That's a new one, isn't it? Some people believe that before we're born, when our consciousness or spirit resides in that unknown space, we are given information about the life we are about to be born into. Some believe we even choose our own life. Not many people can claim that they remember this pre-birth experience, but a man named Gary says he does. In fact, even in his middle-aged years, Gary says he can recall some details of a conversation he had with an angel before he was born. He said, I was bodiless, but aware that I was in an area that was darkened, and I was alone except for the entity that was speaking to me. I was at the bottom of a stairway and was looking up the stairs, but not seeing who was speaking to me. I was very warm and comfortable, but aware and feeling nervous of what I was about to embark on. This entity, he says, was speaking to me and giving me a brief description of how my life would be. I asked for more information, but it was refused. I was basically told that my life would not be a hard life, but would lack any luxuries, and that I would experience great difficulties at a relatively early age. It seems there were a few other small details, but I no longer can remember it quite as clearly as I once did when I was younger. It appears the information was correct, as I'm now disabled and in poor health. I actually do know some people who had memories of prior to being born and talking to their angels and guides, and it's very fascinating. This next story I call Healed by a Nurse Angel. In 1998, Luke was diagnosed with bone cancer at just 8 years old. And as sometimes happens, he came down with an infection. That meant he had to go to the hospital. He was there for about 2 weeks, and that's when something remarkable happened for him. One evening, Luke's mother was sitting at his bedside, quietly praying as he slept. A nurse came into the room to check Luke's temperature, but his mother noted something rather peculiar about her. The nurse was wearing an old-fashioned uniform of the type that would have been common 30 years earlier, in the 1960s. The nurse noticed that Luke's mother had a Bible by the side of the bed. She said that she was a Christian too, and said she would pray for Luke's healing. Luke's family had never seen this nurse dressed oddly before, and they never saw her again in Luke's remaining time at the hospital. Luke says, I came out of the hospital fully healed of my infection. He was 19 when he finally told this story. Remarkably, he's now completely free of cancer. He said, my mom believes this nurse could have been a guardian angel coming down to give my mom some hope. If she wasn't an angel, why would she be wearing 1960s old-fashioned nurse clothing? There's actually quite a few stories of seeing nurses dressed in outfits like that, and they just disappear. The next story I call Money from Angels. We should all have this experience. There are many stories of people receiving much needed money from mysterious, unknown sources. And a woman named Ellie has such a story that she recalls from the summer of January 1994 when she was living in Australia. It was late in the afternoon, and Ellie was outside gathering the family's laundry from the clothesline. There was a sudden small willy-willy, which is an Australian term for a swirling wind funnel of dust and leaves, something we have a lot of here in Arizona too. She said, as it raced past me, I saw something blue whirling in the middle of the dust and leaves and managed to grab hold of it. I was surprised and very pleased to see it was a $10 note. A few days later, Ellie was at the back of the yard checking on her garden tomatoes when she spotted something lying in the grass. She was astonished to find it was a $20 note. Not long afterward, in another part of the garden, she found a $5 note and yet another $20 note nestled among the leaves of her flowers. Ellie said, by this time, I'd told my family about the angel money, and none of them had put money there, not with the possibility of it blowing away in the frequent high winds of summer in that area. All was quiet for a few days, and then one of her sons came in with an ear-to-ear grin and a $20 note that he had just found on top of the compost heap. Now that's unusual. Most of us would say this was not angel money at all, but money that someone had lost and simply blown into Ellie's yard. I believe Ellie. Ellie is not quite convinced of that simple explanation, and that's because a week or so later, she had another amazing find, and this time it was in her home. She said, I was cleaning out from under the bed and I pulled out a pair of slippers, and there nestling in the toe of one of those slippers, like a little grace note, was a 50-cent coin. You just never know how angels are going to bless your life. The next story I call Saved by an Angel. Back in 1980, a woman named Deb was a single mother with 2 infants living in California. She occasionally needed reliable babysitters. Fortunately, her parents lived only about 30 miles away. Deb would usually drop off the kids at her parents' house, go do what she needed to do, and then pick them up that evening. One night, Deb had retrieved her children from her parents' place and was heading home. And it was about 11:30 at night. Deb was driving what she describes as her old clunker. And among the car's many deficiencies, the gas gauge was broken. And this required her to guess when that old car needed fuel. And occasionally her guessing was off. She said, halfway home, the car started to sputter. And I realized my gas tank was on empty. I pulled off the first ramp I could find, and it just happened to be one that was slightly uphill. Almost at the top of the exit, my car died, and there was absolutely nothing around except empty fields and distant lights at a truck stop about a quarter of a mile down the road. With no cars in sight, Deb didn't know what to do. The kids were asleep, and walking miles while carrying two kids in the middle of the night was not going to be a good option. So this was before cell phones existed, so she couldn't even call for help. She said, I put my head on the steering wheel while saying a short and panicky prayer. I hadn't even finished when I heard a few soft taps on the window. And when she looked up, she saw a clean-cut young man standing there who Deb would estimate to be about 21 years old. He motioned for her to roll down her window. She says, I remember I was surprised, but I wasn't even the slightest bit afraid, even though normally I would have been terrified. The young man was dressed well and had a faint smell of soap. He didn't ask if she needed help. Instead, he told her to put the car in neutral and he would help her over that last small hill toward a place where she could get gas. Deb said, I thanked him and followed his instructions. The car started moving. I steered it towards the lights of the truck stop, and I turned around to yell thank you again to him. He was so nice. My car kept moving, but the young man was nowhere in sight. I mean, this area was completely remote. There was absolutely nowhere he could have gone or hidden that quickly, even if there was somewhere to go. I don't even know where he came from to begin with. Deb's car continued to roll down the hill until it reached the truck stop. She was able to get the gas she needed, and the kids remained sound asleep. She said, I've always trusted in God to take care of us, but in relating this story many times to my children, who are now in their early 30s, they know for a fact that angels do exist and are sent to us if we just believe. And really, honestly, for me, just ask. I always thought, this is her words again, I always thought it was so amazing that we were sent someone who I would trust instinctively without question. And since that incident, I've come to believe that we probably encounter angels all the time and take for granted who they really are. I think they come in all shapes and sizes, young and old, and sometimes when we least expect them. The next story I call Angelic Warning. You might wonder, is your future predestined? And how is it that psychics, prophets, mystics can see in the future? Is the future only a set of possibilities, a path that can be altered by our actions? A woman received two separate and remarkable warnings about a possible incident in her future, and these warnings may have saved her life. One night at about 4 a.m, the woman's sister called her. Her voice was trembling and she was nearly crying. Since her sister lived across the country and it was so early, the woman was obviously worried. And the woman said, my sister told me she had a vision of me being in a car accident. She didn't say whether I was killed in it, but the sound of her voice made me think she did believe this, but was afraid to tell me. She told me to pray and said she would pray for me. She told me to be careful, to take another route to work, anything I could do. I told her I believed her and would call our mother and ask her to pray with us. When this woman left for work, she was terrified but strengthened in spirit with this warning. She worked at a hospital and had patients to attend to, and as she was leaving a patient's room, she was called over by a gentleman in a wheelchair. She said, I went to him expecting that he had a complaint against the hospital. He told me God had given him a message that I would be in a car accident. He said someone not paying attention would hit me. I'm getting chills as I tell you this story. I was so shocked I almost fainted. He said he would pray for me and that God loved me. The woman said I felt weak in the knees as I left the hospital. I drove like a little old lady as I observed every intersection, stop sign, and stoplight. And when I got home, I called my mom and sister and told them I was fine. Angels will give messages to people for others. They use every opportunity possible to assist us, and particularly when our lives are in danger. This story is about an angel cloud, which I have an affinity for because when I'd spend my summers in Alabama, in Odenville, Alabama, if any of you are there, I would stay with my grandma, and all she had to read was Guidepost magazines, and they have a section of angel clouds, and I already loved angels, of course, so I was all about those angel clouds. So a Texas man was driving along a highway with his wife when he noticed a particular sighting in the clouds that really stood out to him. He stopped to snap a picture of what he believed was a cloud in the shape of an angel in the sky. He uploaded the image to Facebook, where it's been shared over 19,000 times, probably many more times since. And the man said this sighting was the positive sign he needed during a time of dread. So sometimes it's not an angel coming to you in a solid form, but seeing something in an angelic shape. Anything that is in the shape of an angel is a sign. This is one that relates to 9/11, an angel story. As a tribute to the lives lost on 9/11, twin lights beam into the sky from sunset to sunrise every anniversary. In 2016, a man in New Jersey was taking photos of the lights from across the Hudson River when he realized he'd captured more than just the beams in one of the shots. The image, according to him, is a figure of an angel floating in the night sky. He believes it is indeed an angel watching over us. This is about a pastor's experience. A pastor was driving in Ohio in 2015 when he got into a terrible car accident that sent a live transformer crashing into his car. A news station reported that he was trapped inside of the burning car as the windshield melted and the door folded shut. He said a stranger walked up, opened the door, and removed him from that car to safety. The stranger told him his name was Johnny and that he had to leave the scene before first responders arrived because he can't be here when they get here. The man never saw Johnny again. The man walked away with minor injuries and a stronger sense of determination to serve after his miracle encounter, which he strongly believes was an angel. This is something captured on a security camera. A Michigan resident was touched by an angel after discovering his motion sensor security camera captured an image of an angel hovering over his pickup truck. He instantly sent his photo to the pastor of his church, who then shared the photo on Facebook. Many locals believe the figure in the photo is a sign from heaven. This pastor's Facebook post has since obtained thousands of shares. I've seen that, and it certainly does look like an angel. Next is another nurse story. Luke was diagnosed with bone cancer, and he needed help. His mother had to go home and help with the other children. He had to, at a necessity, be left alone at the hospital for a while, and he was really afraid. And a woman came in who was dressed as a nurse, and he said she had a very sweet face and was so calming, and he instantly felt better around her. And she sat next to him and held his hand and talked softly to him and sang to him until he fell asleep. And the next day, he told his mother about it, and she wanted to thank that nurse, and nobody knew who that was. There was no nurse at that hospital fitting that description, nobody like that on shift the night before. Actually, some other nurses had peeked in on him. There was nobody next to him. And so Luke had the pleasure of an angel's company through his stay that night in his mother's absence. And I love that. I feel like I need to share a personal story with you that one of these stories brought up for me. So back in, I'd say 1980s, because my daughter was 10. It might have been 1991. We were staying in my parents' house in Prescott, Arizona, and they were out of state, so we were sort of house sitting for them. And it was at the top of a very steep hill up in the granite rocks in the area. And I was trying to do too many things at once. I was talking to my daughter, I was getting ready for an activity, and I was baking something, and I put a oven mitt on my hand, and I turned to say something to my daughter. I never did this again, by the way. Reached in the oven to grab a cookie sheet, and instead I grabbed the coil in the oven. Yeah. And it melted through the oven mitt, melted into my hand, and I went into shock. And all I had there was my 10-year-old daughter. We didn't have cell phones then. Michelle, my daughter, tried to call some people that were in the area, couldn't get a hold of anybody. And my 10-year-old daughter had to drive me to the emergency room. Now, thank God it wasn't very far, but remember, this house is on the top of a hill. My dad loved to build houses on what looked like ski slopes. So I'm coaching her and holding with my good hand that's not burned from the passenger seat and trying to help her go down that driveway. Somehow we made it down that steep driveway, and the 2 or 3 miles down the road to the hospital through several lights. No problems, got there. She didn't have to drive us back home. But the real miracle, when I got there and got the oven mitt off my hand, they said, you're going to have 3rd-degree burns here. This is 3rd degree. You're going to require burn care. And I'm going to show you my hand. I had no care. I just left it bandaged, and it healed really quickly. And it was right here, a very deep trench across this hand on my left hand, and there's no scar of any kind. So I feel like angels were surrounding the car for us that day. I was in too much pain to see them or feel them in that moment, but I can't imagine any other way a 10-year-old who'd never driven could make it down that hill into the hospital, and that my hand would heal this well quickly. I mean, it's been a long time ago, but within a year or two, it looked like this and no treatment. So angels will help in many different situations. They know when we're desperate. They know when we need them most. And if you have an angel story that you're willing to have me share on my podcast, please email them to me. I will be doing a part 4 in the very near future. You can email those stories to me at Ivory Angelic, and just include your first name. You don't need to have highly identifiable information about yourself in the story. I'm not looking to embarrass anybody, but your stories are so beautiful and so helpful to other people. So feel free to send them to me if you have them. Tune in next week. The topic is the purple angelic light ray. And in the meantime, may your angels surround you. May your angels protect you every moment, every day of your life. I'll see you next week.